counseling, medical assistance, and legal support for this young girl. So God, we thank you and we ask you to guide us in this very difficult task that we have of responding to GBV survivors, so many in this country and all over the world. Guide us and give us the wisdom to do your will through our various organizations, the laws and policies that we have, and the shelters that provide this service. I ask all this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Maggie, for your prayer. And for bringing to the fore the issue that has brought us here. I'd like to recognize the presence of very important persons here with us. We are all important in our own capacities, but I'd like to pay special tribute to people who have supported this particular issue of shelters in Uganda. And as you know, this is a national symposium on the impact and sustainability of gender-based violence shelters in Uganda. And first and foremost, I'd like to recognize the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, and hopefully the Minister will join us soon. Thank you for being here as the ministry and as representing the Republic of Uganda. I'd also like to recognize Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden, who's here with us. She kept time, and her name is Maria Hackinson. Please stand up for recognition. We thank you for all the support and for being here with us. I'd also like to recognize the presence of the country representative of UN Women, and she's called Paulina Chiwangu. She's very new to Uganda, and she says this is her very first event. We wish you the very best as you serve, and we know that you will be productive in Uganda. We're ready to support you. Thank you for being here. I'd like to recognize the presence of the Action Aid International Uganda, Xavier Ejoy. Where are you, sir? If you're not here, I know you have your staff here because you're one of the conveners of this meeting. And then finally, I'd like to recognize other people here in our midst from the UN agencies. I know we have UNHCR. I saw you, my sister, Hadija Ali, my very good friend and colleague from many years ago. Thank you, Ms. Hadija, for joining us today. Are there the other from sister agencies and other embassies? The Norwegian Embassy, I think you're here. Thank you, Mary. Thank you for being here with us. We also want to recognize the fact that this meeting is being held by the Ministry of Gender, UN Women, Action Aid, with the support of the Embassy of Sweden and Norway. So we thank you for this support and for hosting us today. We have in our midst some of our people from the different parts of Uganda. We have the CAOs and the DCDOs, and these are from the East. If you belong to this group from the East, please stand up for recognition. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Kampala. If you are from West Nile and you are from, belong to this group of CAOs and DCDOs, please stand up for recognition. Thank you. And if you're from the north, I have North and West Nile. Please stand up for recognition too. So North is West Nile? Maybe. That's maybe the information. Thank you. I also want to recognize our keynote address speaker who's here with us. She's Jean Kemitare, Program Director, Urgent Action Fund. Jean, please stand up for recognition. Yeah, I just got here. Apologies. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to, maybe at this point in time, say all protocol is observed. And if you'd like us to recognize you, feel free to approach us. We are flexible. Thank you. I'd like to follow the program from here onwards. We'd like to make up for lost time. And I'd like to take this honor and opportunity to invite the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labor, of Gender, Labor and Social Development, who will be represented by Madame Angela Nakafero. You are welcome, and thank you again for hosting us. I've been advised that the dignitaries should take their place at the very front. Would like to request you to take your seats. The ambassadors, the UN Women Representative, the Action Aid, Executive Director, please take your seats. You may have to abandon them when we view the documentary. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, and you have the floor, Madame Nakafero.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, the Honorable Minister in absentia. We are expecting the Honorable Minister to join us. Honorable Members of Parliament, Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden, the representative of the Norwegian Ambassador, the head of technical cooperation from the High Commissions, the country representative, our country representative, UN Women, the Director of Action Aid, Chief Administrative Officers, officials from government ministries, departments and agencies, local governments, our partners who are supporting government of Uganda to manage the shelters, representatives from civil society organizations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm standing in the shoes which are big, but I'll do my best. Good morning, everybody. You're most welcome to our symposium, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the Permanent Secretary, Minister of Gender, Labor, Social Development, I take this opportunity to warmly welcome you to the symposium where we are going to discuss issues of sustainability of the gender-based violence shelters in Uganda. Thank you for honoring our invitation. In a special way, I would like to welcome the UN country representative, Dr. Paulina Chiwangu, if I'm pronouncing your name properly. This is her first event. She's new to this position. and warmly welcome you to Uganda. Ministry of Gender, Labour, Social Development, ladies and gentlemen, enjoys a strong partnership in the delivery of our work, and we celebrate that. It has been built over time. We are looking forward to renewed energies as we push for the gender equality and women's empowerment agenda in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we are here is to take stock of the contribution and impact of the gender-based violence shelters in Uganda, but specifically in terms of responding to the needs of the survivors of gender-based violence. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us in this country are aware that the prevalence of gender-based violence is high. And of course, that creates challenging scenarios for the survivors, and to a certain extent we also need to start discussing the issue of the perpetrators. We focused on the survivors by design. We also need to focus on the perpetrators with the intention of rehabilitation, so that they don't recommit the same crimes they've been commuting over time. Our journey of the gender-based violence shelters in Uganda started in 2007 with a pilot of 3 gender-based violence shelters, 2 in Kampala, 1 in Mubende, and then 1 in Palisa, directly under the management of civil society organization. We celebrate a strong partnership with the non-state actors, and this is the way to go, ladies and gentlemen. Ministry of Gender, Labour, Social Development, on behalf of Government of Uganda, also picked a lot of interest in ensuring the management, the establishment of the GBV shelter, and of course, as a ministry, we've developed the laws and policies that are guiding GBV shelter operations. We also have guidelines on the establishment, management, and sustainability of the shelters. And against these, we've been able to support and supervise service delivery in the shelters. To date, we have 20 gender-based violence shelters legally registered under the Ministry of Gender, Labour, Social Development. And of course, I also need to note that we have challenges regarding the funding for the sustainability and ensuring that the GBV shelters are able to offer a package of services required by the survivors. However, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that when we put our heads together, working closely with our development partners, we'll be able to ensure the sustainability of these shelters wherever they are, and ensuring that the survivors really are prioritized in terms of service delivery. This is the reason why we are here, and we are hoping that this symposium is going to offer us a great opportunity for us to discuss the future of the gender-based violence shelters in Uganda. I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to the development partners that have continued to provide both technical and financial support towards the establishment, management, and sustaining the operations of the shelter. Allow me to extend special appreciation to the UK aid that supported the establishment of 13 shelters in different parts of the country. Allow me to thank EU, UN Spotlight Initiative, that is continuing to give us support for a number of shelters and through UN Women. Allow me to thank USAID through Seed Center for Disease Control that is also contributing to the management of the GBV shelter in Masaka and Mubende. And of course, not forgetting the Netherlands Embassy that is supporting the shelter in Kamuli and Namutumba through Uganda Women Network. For us, it's been a tripartite partnership in the delivery of GBV shelters services in Uganda. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to your contribution and insights on how we should improve shelter service delivery in Uganda, but also specifically on how we are going to ensure that there's financial resources. Government of Uganda has committed support, but of course it's not enough for all the 20 shelters, and we are counting on you to join us in terms of ensuring that we keep our shelters operational and providing the much needed services. On behalf of the Permanent Secretary, Mr. David Agre Kibenge, and on my own behalf as Commissioner Gender and Women Affairs, directly in charge of the ensuring quality of services in the shelters, I warmly welcome you, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion today and informing the future of GBV shelter management in Uganda. For God and my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Angela Nakafero, for standing in for the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. And yes, please do take your seat, because now you are the Permanent Secretary. Thank you. So I'd like to move on to the remarks which will be made by the Director of Action Aid International Uganda. And we have the representative here with us. Kindly come and make these remarks, and you are very welcome. Or you can actually make them from there, which will make it convenient for all of us. But as she makes these remarks, I think maybe there could be some in the room who are asking themselves, or maybe for the media's consumption, about the aspect of shelters. What are these shelters? What are they for? In this case, we are talking about shelters for survivors of gender-based violence. And as we all know, gender-based violence comes up in different forms. In some cases, like we had in the prayer, it's in form of rape, defilement. In other cases, it's in form of female genital mutilation. We have domestic violence. We have trafficking in persons. So all these types of violence are being manifested in our community. And sometimes when someone is raped or defiled, they don't have any place to go to. So they run to the shelter for assistance. And this is why we are talking about these shelters. And these shelters provide different services. Apart from counseling, they can provide for medical services. They can also provide for shelter and even security. Because sometimes if it's domestic violence and someone is running from her home, she's actually seeking for security. They could also provide for some food and basic needs. So these shelters are very important in our community. And as you heard, we have 20 of them. So I thought I'd make this clarification so that we know why we are here, why we need to sustain them, and also to appreciate those who have supported these shelters up to this point in time. We are grateful. So Action Aid, please make your points. Thank you.
Thank you. I Thank you very much. Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden, the country representative of the UN Women, and all the UN agencies present, the government ministries led by the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, our CSO representatives and partners present, the district local government representatives from the different regions where we are running GBV shelters who have traveled all the way. We recognize your presence. Our heroines, the survivors who have made their way to this space to be part of this very important discussion, we recognize your presence. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mercy Grace Munduru. I'm the head of programs at ActionAid International Uganda, one of the implementing partners, but also one that has run the GBV shelters for a couple of years across the different regions of this country. I'd like to start my remarks by appreciating the different partners in their different capacities, because the question and the discussions around sustainability cannot be held without recognizing the efforts and the impact of this work that has directly been as a result of their support to the running of the GBV shelters. So I would like to start by thanking the Embassy of Sweden and the UN Women for their funded support to the shelters. Initially, this support was a bridging fund at the time when the SAGE project that was supporting over 16 shelters had ended. And this was also at the time when the COVID-19 pandemic was ravaging the country, and GBV was on the rise, and it was a crisis of its own. That support did not end as a bridging fund, but it has continued to sustain the GBV shelters until today as we are having these conversations. I would like to thank you because this support was very critical at that time, and I give this gratitude not on behalf of ActionAid, but also the survivors who are sitting in the room today, because had this support not come in at that time, we would have seen a whole different face to the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much. We also extend the same gratitude to the other partners that the Commissioner has rightfully listed, who continue to provide support to the different GBV shelters to ensure that they're up and running and providing the much needed service to survivors of gender-based violence. We give a very special thanks to the government of Uganda, and specifically to the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, who has been a very critical partner, a coordinator, a leader and a fundraiser for the GBV shelters. We've had a very, very fruitful relationship with the ministry, who many times goes beyond their position as the coordinating ministry to offer support where there is a critical need. And I would like to commend particularly the Commissioner, who is seated right next to me. She has often gone beyond the call of duty to come to our aid where we're in a crisis, where we need a coordination structure for the GBV shelters to run. So we thank you, Madam Commissioner, for your relentless support. But also the district local governments where these shelters are have gone over and beyond in offering physical space, in offering resources, but also coordinating activities of actors at the local level to ensure that the shelters are up and running. The question of sustainability is a critical one, and this question has been asked to ActionAid for the past 15 years. It's a question we've asked ourselves internally about the future of the shelters. And this became more glaring when the SAGE project ended, and we were thinking about where do we move from here. And many times when we speak about sustainability, of course, the quick thought is about donor funding. What are you thinking beyond donor funding? But before we discuss about the donor funding and the sustainability question around it, I would like to implore each one of us to think about sustainability from the lens of the survivor. What does sustainability mean for the survivors of gender-based violence? And for us, sustainability also relates to what our relevance really is as partners who are doing this work. And we measure sustainability by feedback of our survivors. When a survivor reports living free from violence, that is what helps us to reflect and say this work is relevant, and in fact it needs to be sustained, because there is a woman who is mentioning to you that since they received the service, they have been living free from violence. When we think about sustainability from that lens, then it becomes a call not just for donors, but also for each one of us, including the civil society organizations and other actors at all levels who have to champion the call for sustainability. That does not negate the importance of funding for this work, but it also emphasizes the fact that this must not be the only lens through which we discuss sustainability, that this must be a responsibility for all the partners that are passionate and committed to the work around gender-based violence. And in that case, as ActionAid Uganda, many times we've found ourselves in situations where we've had to go beyond donor funding to try and find mechanisms of sustaining the shelters that are under our care. And this same mindset has also rolled down to the district local government. And I would give an example of some of the district local governments where we work, who have gone beyond what they do to allocate resources from their existing budgets to support the shelters in their districts. Districts like Katakwi, Kwen, Nebi district and others have allocated land, have apportioned budgets to enhance the support that we receive from donors and ensure that they demonstrate their commitment to the sustainability of these shelters through actually committing these resources. And therefore, our coming here today is to open our minds to the reality of the challenges surrounding this work, but also looking at our impact and thinking about sustainability beyond donor funding. That donor funding is important, and it is one that we should continue to pursue, but also that the government of Uganda, the district local governments, the CSOs must start to think innovatively about the future of these shelters. And ActionAid Uganda, we remain committed to our work with the Ministry of Gender and partners who want to advance the work around GBV shelters beyond the shelter itself, but also other related services that ensure that the services we render at the shelters are effective and that they have impact. And I know throughout this day, we will see stories of success from the different areas where we work that start guiding the discussion of sustainability from the perspective of the communities where this work is. I would like to end by thanking all of you for being here and for joining in this fight, and also for committing time to be here to discuss the impact and the sustainability of the GBV shelters. I thank you.
Thank you very much, ActionAid, represented by Mercy, Grace, Nduro, for those comments. Thank you. And thank you for expanding our understanding of the word sustainability. At least I've got that from just not ensuring that the shelters continue to operate, but looking at it from the dimension of the survivor. And I also want to thank you for recognizing the survivors who are here. I think in due course, we shall hear from them and from the experience. And thank you again for also recognizing the local government's work. I'd like to chip in that at one time, the Parliament of Uganda, under the guidance of the Right Honorable Kadaga then, did contribute to the sustainability of shelters, especially in the district of Kwen, to address the issue of female genital mutilation. So we would like this to be expanded, and these best practices to also be able to be utilized across the country, because 20 shelters are obviously not enough, much as we would like some more money for these very shelters. I'd like to stop here and invite Her Excellency, the country representative of UN, Paulina Chiwangu, to make her comments. Thank you.
like to start acknowledging the presence of government officials who are here today, especially the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden, Ms. Maria Hankansson. I would like to acknowledge all embassies present here today, Austria, of course Sweden, Norway, Netherlands, France, United States. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues from other UN agencies present here today, UNHCR, OHCR, UNFPA, and my colleagues from UN Women and other UN agencies present here today. Also other representatives from international community, religious and cultural leaders, civil society organizations, and also survivors of gender-based violence. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, in case I forgot anybody. I think I want to start by introducing myself again. My name is Paulina Chiwangu, and I'm the new country representative for UN Women. I have been here for 3 weeks, but this is not my first time in Uganda. I left Uganda about 7 years ago. And before I left, I had lived here for 4 years. And I think one of the biggest programs that UN Women ran at the time, it was the joint program on gender equality. And the issues that we are discussing here today more or less are the same issues that we discussed 10, 11 years ago. Survivors of shelters. We had, at the time, we had 5 shelters which were funded by DFID. I think after 4 years of that funding, the funds lapsed and the shelters, I think some of them were closed. I think it was that time when I left Uganda. I was running away from these discussions. But I'm back now. And the same discussion is going on. I really like the comments made by the director of Action Aid that we really need to think about sustainability and what really sustainability means. Not only for shelters as shelters, but also for survivors. So I think we will take that on board as we discuss today the issues of shelters. Here in Uganda, we continue to see high levels of violence against women and girls. We have seen more than half, 56% of women who are experiencing physical and or sexual violence in their lifetime. We know very well that the government of Uganda has made impressive, very impressive and commendable efforts to address this challenge. And these efforts have been translated through legislative reforms and increasing access to justice. We are aware of Domestic Violence Act 2010. I was still in the country. Prohibition of female genital mutilation, again 2010. The National Policy on GBV 2019 and others. We are aware of all those efforts which were made by the government. It's the same for development partners. Development partners, as I've said, they have started a long time ago to support the efforts of the government and also to support the efforts of the citizens in this country. For instance, partners have supported, as the director have articulated, programs like Spotlight, joint program on GBV. All those efforts, we have seen them. Civil society organizations were not left behind. And also grassroots women's rights organizations have also played their part and have been key in preventing and responding to violence against women and girls in this country, the Republic of Uganda. Action Aid, as our sister here have articulated, have also played their part. And we acknowledge that Action Aid have been a core convener of this important event today. So, despite these years of collective and sustained efforts, you know, when the world was hit by COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, so one of the most striking social impacts outside the immediate medical response was the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence that emerged in its wake. We have seen globally cases have skyrocketed and years of progress was undone in few months. All the efforts that we have been doing over the years were almost finished because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of COVID-19 has been huge. And yet at the time, which I can understand, it's because all of us were panicking. What is this new pandemic which have hit the world? All the effort was, how can we stop COVID? We didn't invest more in discuss on the post-COVID situation. So now we are being hit by most of these impacts of COVID, more than just COVID-19 itself and the many loved ones, friends, colleagues that we have lost, but the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Teenage pregnancy, which is a pandemic here in Uganda. So, I mean, we have seen it all over the world, but Uganda was not an exception. I'm sure all of you have followed up the news. We have seen reports of domestic violence. The police force have reported an increase of 27% in 2020. This is in addition to increases in the rates of teenager pregnancy, which I've mentioned, and other harmful practices. So the pandemic laid bare the shortcomings of previous efforts to prevent and respond to unacceptable violence of basic rights. A weak link that was exposed in our efforts was the provision of shelter. Beyond awareness and knowledge of rights, access to justice and medical care and other services, what survivors really needed was somewhere to run to, somewhere that survivors could feel safe, and that was shelters. So lack of shelter is a primary barrier which survivors of domestic violence face when they choose to leave an abusive partner, an abusive relationship. So if there is lack of shelters, we can imagine what these survivors can do. Physical abuse does not happen in isolation. The majority of survivors also experience financial abuse. This means that they often do not have access to finances or options to leave. And this jeopardizes their situation even more. So I think the director mentioned and the moderator that we have about 13 GBV shelters across Uganda. And these shelters are managed by Action Aid and Mifumi. So within these shelters, and the number of cases recorded rose sharply to 8,680 during the lockdown period, from April to August 2020, compared to 5,040 in 2019-2020, and 3,308 in 2018-2019, which represent a 72.2% and 162% increase respectively. we hear those figures which are alarming. The statistics are alarming. This is the reality on the ground. So this came at a time when those shelters' funding had reduced and even expired. But we are really extremely grateful to the partners, including Sweden, European Union, Norway, and SAFE, who allowed us to step in and keep them open. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gather here today, I would like us to proactively and with an open mind to engage in a frank discussion on the sustainability of GBV shelters in the Republic of Uganda. This should include looking at different ideas and options that will present financing of shelters. And we are going to discuss today financing of shelters. But beyond financing of shelters, what other options are there? So UN Women is full cognizant of the various efforts underway. These include efforts which are made at district local government level, where some districts allocated financing towards running of shelters. Others have even offered land for construction of shelters. But as we gather here today, the reality is that some of the GBV shelters are not operational because of funding, while others are at the brink of closure due to the same. So, in conclusion, I would like to ask, first of all, the government of Uganda. I understand that the Commission, in her speech, she said that the government have committed some funds. But I would still like to appeal to the government that more resources are allocated to the shelter. Also, I would like to appeal to the government of Uganda to ensure that the institutionalization of the GBV shelters in Uganda are fast-tracked, because we need them to be institutionalized. Secondly, I would like to appeal to development partners to consider integrating support towards the GBV shelters in their programming on GBV, and consider positively, where possible, some of the blended and alternative options for financing GBV shelters can be done. And I'm sure we will discuss this today. Finally, to our partners from private sector and other actors, we would similarly appeal to strengthen ongoing engagements to end violence against women and girls and other kinds, either in kind or also by providing financial support. So please share with us today any ideas that you might have for increasing this engagement. Your ideas, your comments will be very helpful to this struggle to tackle issues of gender-based violence. So I wish all of you a very fruitful discussion, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thank you.
Can we have a bigger hand clap, please? Thank you. I'm saying this because I'm very delighted that Her Excellency, the UN country rep, is not new to Uganda. So she has already hit the ground running, as you can see, and we are very delighted to have you here, Madame Paulina, and we look forward to more interactions. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the support and your consistency. I will just highlight one point. She's made very good points. But she's brought out the aspect of COVID. You remember in the COVID-19 pandemic and what happened. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for Uganda, and you rightly said it, is the issue of teenage pregnancies. That one is still here with us. And we must find a way of addressing it, because some of our shelters actually had to address this particular issue. So thank you very much for highlighting it, and thank you for highlighting all the other aspects of the need to continue supporting the shelters. Thank you. Apart from that aspect of teenage pregnancies, I think what we could also observe, especially during COVID-19, was the aspect of psychosocial support, the need for mental and psychosocial support. I think more than ever, we have come to realize that it's not only about the physical violence, we also need to address the emotional violence, which is not so obvious. And sometimes the scars are not obvious, and yet this is what impacts our everyday living. So I thought I would bring this to the fore. Before I go ahead to invite the next speaker, I'd like to recognize the presence of a member of the Uganda Women Parliamentary Association, Honorable Goreth Namuga, Member of Parliament, Mawogola South County. You are very welcome. You are very welcome. Thank you for being here with us. This is a lady who's very powerful, because she's also representing the Uganda Women Parliamentary Association as the central regional representative. So we are glad to have you here. And we also know that you are in Parliament on the basis of a constituency, winning a constituency, which is very important. Thank you very much for joining us, Honorable Namuga, and we hope you will be our ambassador in Parliament. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize the presence of the EU representative here, representative of the European Union. Please stand up. Thank you very much for joining us. And if there's any other representative that we may have missed out, please approach us. As I said before, we are flexible and we apologize. So in the meantime, we want to thank you and to thank all the others who have joined us. I think for the record, I just wanted to say that we have 20 shelters. Action Aid is running 13 shelters. Mifumi is running 3 shelters. Okoa Refuge is running 1 shelter. INET is running 1. WONET is running 2. And Uganet is running 1. So this makes it 20 shelters in partnership with the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development. So these are the shelters that we have. I'd like to take this opportunity to humbly welcome Her Excellency the Ambassador Maria Hackinson, Embassy of Sweden. Thank you very much for keeping time. Apologies for the delays. And thank you very much for your consistency in supporting shelters in Uganda. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, both represented here by the Commissioner for Gender and Women Affairs, country representative from UN Women, the representative of Action Aid, members of Parliament, representatives of district local government, development partners, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here today to give remarks on such an important symposium on the impact and sustainability of shelters for gender-based violence in Uganda. Gender-based violence is one of the most widespread violations of human rights and an obvious expression of unequal gender relations in a society. Gender-based violence is the most extreme form of gender inequality, and it's a serious hindrance to sustainable development. Ending gender-based violence and ensuring women's security is a priority for the Swedish government, a priority reflected in central objectives of Swedish policy for development cooperation and the feminist foreign policy. This means that we systematically integrate a gender perspective in all our work and that we strive to strengthen all women's and girls' rights, representation, and resources based on the reality in which they live. Sweden's feminist foreign policy is a transformative agenda that aims to change structures and enhance the visibility of women and girls as actors. Discrimination and gender inequality in all life stages and contexts shall be counteracted. Sweden works to prevent and reduce the prevalence of gender-based violence across all thematic areas in our strategy here in Uganda. We take a holistic approach to gender-based violence, and through the UN Joint Programme on Gender-Based Violence, with integrated sexual and reproductive health and rights, we cover all 4 pillars: prevention, legal justice and accountability, integrated services, and community behavior and social norms, as well as strengthening coordination, learnings, and innovation for elimination of gender-based violence and the realization of sexual reproductive health and rights for women, girls, boys, and men. In Uganda, violence is one of the largest obstacles to development. Violence restricts the opportunities for people to enjoy their human rights, undermines security and the principles of the rule of law, and leads to major economic costs for society. If women, girls, men, and boys are not safe, they cannot fully participate in the development of their own society. And violence is often used to silence women who raise their voices, threatening their freedom of expression and democracy at large. The year 2020 was meant to be a milestone year for gender equality. Instead, progress has reversed. As the country director of UN Women just explained, COVID-19 affected everyone, and especially girls and young women, in all aspects of their daily life. Their safety, well-being, education, economic security, health, and nutrition. All pre-existing inequalities were made worse by COVID-19. One of the most serious consequences is that gender-based violence became what we call a shadow pandemic. So also here in Uganda, and the need of shelters and protection have become even more apparent. As Sweden, we believe it's important that gender-based violence shelters is part of a multi-sectoral approach, where multi-sectoral services at all levels are strengthened, integrated and coordinated in both development and humanitarian contexts. Shelters are part of the referral system that provide victims and survivors with temporary refuge, lodging, other services, and also link victims and survivors to medical, legal, economic, and psychosocial services. Gender-based violence services must be survivor-centered and ensure safety of the survivor, confidentiality, and respect for the survivor and his right to informed choice. All actions need to be guided by respect for the choices, wishes, rights, and dignity of the survivor. Survivors of violence should receive equal and fair treatment, regardless of their age, gender, race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or any other characteristic. Although the state is ultimately responsible for the safety of survivors, it's important that not only the state, but also women's organizations are provided with resources to give support. Women's organizations often have a deep knowledge and long experience of support and service to survivors of gender-based violence. Nevertheless, preventing gender-based violence to stop it from happening in the first place should obviously still be the key priority. And there is a need to focus more on the root causes of gender-based violence, which are found in gender-based power inequalities and gender-based discrimination. Responsive measures, such as providing adequate service to survivors, is crucial and life-saving, but it does not necessarily stop the violence from happening in the first place or prevent it from happening again. An important part of prevention is involving men and boys. Men and boys can be drivers of change and need to be involved and take responsibility in the work on gender equality as well as in the fight against gender-based violence. Prevention efforts need to start early in life and be directed at both girls and boys. Both non-formal and formal education are important sites for normative change and have the potential to address gender inequalities and to prevent gender-based violence and improve sexual reproductive health and rights. Men and boys are often neglected as survivors of gender-based violence, and there is a need to recognize and address men's and boys' particularly vulnerabilities and needs in relation to gender-based violence. We often talk about male involvement, that is as often misunderstood as simply bringing men in to work against violence against women. There is a need to work more towards transformed norms around gender relations and masculinity. Such an approach acknowledges that men and boys are also restricted by expectations linked to masculinity and can also be victims of violence. When successful, such an approach enables men and boys to become agents of change. So now the time to walk the talk. I challenge women and men in all spheres of society to step up to the plate. Your words are important, but ultimately only actions count. It's more urgent than ever to prevent and respond to the horrific crimes against women and girls that are taking place globally and in Uganda. As Sweden, we are committed to continue the fight against gender-based violence in Uganda through a holistic approach and flexibility in our programs and trust in our partners so we can address issues and pressing needs as they emerge. I wish you all a very constructive and productive discussions today, and thank you very much for being here and listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We really do appreciate your support, and we thank you for your commitment to continue with supporting this fight through a holistic approach. We thank you very much. Can we please give her another round of applause? Thank you, thank you. There's so much I could pick from your speech, but I just wanted to highlight some very important aspects which might not have been mentioned before. The aspect of the multi-sectoral approach, the aspect of shelters being part of the referral system, the aspect of rights of survivors, transforming norms, especially engaging men and boys, is very, very, very important. And walking the talk. Walking the talk, and you clearly stated that only actions count. So really, I think Minister of Gender Madam Nakafero, you are here. That point, walking that talk, only actions count. Really, for me, is my takeaway. As government, I think more needs to be done, and we thank you again, our partners, for being with us and for this commitment. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you. The speeches for the morning part, the opening session, was supposed to have been concluded with the official opening of the minister, and I'm reliably informed that she has been delayed, but she's on the way. So please, let's keep her hope alive, and she will be here. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to watch a documentary on the impact of gender-based violence shelter intervention in Uganda. Actions speak louder than words. Say a picture says 1,000 words, something like that. So from seeing, we'll be able to see the impact much more clearly than just
gender-based violence or violence against women in
our team.
gender-based violence.
This documentary so that we can be able to better understand
Gen-
the impact and the need to sustain gender-based violence shelters. Thank you very much again for your opening remarks. We appreciate your commitment and your support. Thank you.
Gender-based violence or violence against women and girls is one of the most common and widespread human rights violations, affecting 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. These incidences cost the Ugandan economy about 77 billion Uganda shillings annually.
If action it wasn't there, how will be women standing in their homes? Because the number of women being abused in different fashions are too many.
A 12-year-old was defiled by her uncle several times. She was threatened to never disclose this to anyone or else. Gender-based violence or violence against women and girls is one of the most common and widespread human rights violations, affecting 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. These incidences cost the Ugandan economy about 77 billion Uganda shillings annually.
If action it wasn't there, how will be women standing in their homes? Because the number of women being abused in different fashions are too many.
A 12-year-old was defiled by her uncle several times. She was threatened to never disclose this to anyone or else she would be killed. On one of the occasions, she was on her way to fetch water and the same perpetrator grabbed her, forced her into the bush and defiled her at knife point. Alanya was admitted to the shelter for psychological support to alleviate mental distress due to the trauma she experienced. While at the shelter, she wondered gender-based violence or violence against women and girls is one of the most common and widespread human rights violations, affecting 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. These incidences cost the Ugandan economy about 77 billion Uganda shillings annually.
If action it wasn't there, how will be women standing in their homes? Because the number of women being abused in different fashions are too many.
A 12-year-old was defiled by her uncle several times. She was threatened to never disclose this to anyone or else she would be killed. On one of the occasions, she was on her way to fetch water, and the same perpetrator grabbed her, forced her into the bush, and defiled her at knife point. Alanya was admitted to the shelter for psychological support to alleviate mental distress due to the trauma she experienced. While at the shelter, she wondered if she would still live because she was infected with HIV.
I asked her what happened. Immediately, I rushed to the police, who then told me to bring or reveal where the man stays. The police went to arrest him as we headed with the girl to the hospital. But unfortunately, Christine was found HIV positive. The boy was taken by the police and screened, also found HIV/AIDS positive.
So the survivor was admitted to the GBV shelter for 3 days, where she was offered counseling because she was so traumatized to the extent that she wanted to commit suicide. So for the 3 days that she was at the GBV shelter, we stayed with her, offering counseling, but also providing information on positive living. We have been doing home follow-up to ensure that continued counseling is provided to the mother and the daughter.
Susan Achora is a young woman who is a survivor of physical violence. She was battered daily by her husband when he got home drunk. One day, she was badly beaten that she fell into a coma while she was 8 months pregnant.
I'm Susan. I got married to my husband in 2018, and we started living peacefully until when his friends started giving him wrong advice not to stay with me because I'm not good enough for him. He listened to his friends and he turned violence towards me. He started beating me until one day he beat me so badly when I was 8 months old pregnant, to the extent that I had to be admitted in the hospital for 3 days.
At 12 years old, Stella's parents wanted to marry her off against her will. She was harassed by them until she had to seek refuge kilometers from home. Even then, her perpetrators continued to follow her. She finally felt relief when she was admitted at the GBV shelter in Moroto district.
First of all, she left home. She was sleeping in the bush because of what happened to her. She wanted to dodge the parents and the perpetrator, so she was sleeping in the bush. Then also she was traumatized. She was not in her normal senses. Every time she could feel they are coming after her, so the trauma was too much on her. Also, she dropped out of school. She was in school, but because the parents wanted to give her out, when they reached there, first of all, they knew they are already safe. They are in the safe environment, in the right hands, and they are in a safe place also, whereby at least no one can easily access them. Even the trauma already disappeared. They were free. They were able to interact with each other freely. The trauma also disappeared.
GBV shelters are a part of the referral system that provide victims and survivors with a temporary refuge, lodging and other services, as well as link them to medical, legal, economic and psychosocial services.
Okay, when the survivors come, we do give them counseling, psychosocial support and guidance. And we also go ahead to encourage them on income generating activities. For some of the cases, like especially the mothers, yes, they come and complain, my husband has done this, he has refused to support me, but we encourage them also to be empowered on their own. So we give them skills like maybe opening those businesses, do farming. We have a lot of land. So we encourage them to do farming and maybe sell or at least keep the family going on.
At every stage that the survivor reaches, there is always a need for financial support. For example, as I said, when they come here, they have immediate needs that still need money. When you refer them maybe to police, they still an aspect of financial support. When it comes, maybe when the matter is reaching to a level of going to court, there is still financial support there because you need to file a case for this person. There are always charges in what? In court. They need filing fee, they need a fee for summoning the other person. All those fees there, this person is not able to get. So the person will always look upon to the shelter to see how is my case, has it been filed, is the lawyer coming, has the summon been given. So to effectively really make these shelters effective, when the shelters need financial support.
Susan, Alanyo and Stella all benefited from these services, and this helped them recover from the trauma they each went through. Women and girls fear to report incidences due to poverty, lack of awareness, lengthy formal procedures, weak enforcement of laws, and financial dependence. Caregivers say GBV shelters have tremendously helped in creating healing, but also safe spaces to victims and survivors of GBV. It is here that protection, psychosocial support, legal support, and skills development is planned and given to victims.
The shelter has been really so much beneficial. Why? For instance, you realize that we developed the referral pathway, which is in place. We also customize it to fit the sub-county. You realize that we have many cases of female genital mutilation in the Tepeth community. We have issues of child marriages down in the community. Then we have also cases of capital nature, like aggravated defilement cases. So most of these survivors run for rescue. So you realize that we accommodate them at our GBV shelter. So that's why you realize that the GBV shelter is so much beneficial to us. Why? Because we provide psychosocial support, we accommodate these children, we give them food. Then at the end of it all, we reintegrate them to be with their families. So we feel this is a safer haven for them, for these children, for the girls, so that they are never traumatized. This is a safer place for them.
In communities where shelters have been closed, challenges are imminent. In Moroto, for example, survivors of violence share the same facility with district officers, something caregivers say can expose them further.
We also have a challenge of resources to maintain them. Just as you have heard that our shelter is closed, those are the challenges that we have. If there are no partners, or there last time Mifumi had was running the shelter, but later on I think the funds got finished and the survivors had to be brought back. Of course, one of the challenges is keeping them here in the police. But of course, we have nowhere to send them. It is our duty to protect them until when we see that it's safe for them to go back. So the challenge we have is, one, the resources are not all that. And then of course, the shelter is not fully fledged, it's not running fully. Funds not there all the time. And one of the challenges we also have is accessing those areas which are inaccessible, like the mountain. Like the girls we have right now, they are all from the mountain.
Shelters play a vital role in GBV response. They are safe haven for survivors and have become a beacon of hope in communities and an example of what can be achieved when there is a solidarity against the crime of violence against women and girls in many parts of Uganda. This life-saving support must be sustained.
And this is something that all stakeholders, together with the district local government, we are joining hands together to ensure that we fight this monster of GBV, violence against children, women and girls.
It is our hope that even if Action Aid is not here tomorrow, any agency or government by that time would still follow up these matters since they are documented through our GBV database, the national one, and the MIS for the institution, and also we maintain physical files.
Thank you very much. I hope you've been able to pick some information on the aspect of impact. But if you didn't, the point here is really to ensure that you have a shelter which can provide services. And some of the services provided include medical, they include psychosocial services, as well as counseling. They include legal services and the economic services, the aspect of livelihood, which Action Aid mentioned. Just before we go for break, I just wanted to highlight that aspect of the economic and livelihood services for our consumption. A story was told about a lady in the Democratic Republic of Congo who was getting services from Panzi. And even after she had gotten medical treatment and had gotten better, she still did not want to leave her bed. And later it was discovered that she needed more counseling and psychosocial therapy. And more importantly, she needed some kind of group to belong to so that she could restore her dignity through, for example, working with this group to get some little money to do some business. So as we were watching, if you watch very closely, and you saw those who were, harvesting groundnuts and maize, you realize that this gives them a sense of dignity and sustainability from the angle that was being mentioned, not only of the shelter, but the person who has received the services. Yeah. So it's very important that we look at it in a wholesome manner, and we're able to ensure that it's not only the shelter, but the persons who come to the shelter who will be able to get services which can sustain them and also support others. Yeah. So I'd like to stop here for the morning, and we could have a health break. But before the health break, we were proposing that we have the photograph. Unfortunately, I think some may have left, but we are here. But please do join us in the group photo, and then we'll have a short break. And asking Angela, Action Aid, to help us with time management, because we need to do it quickly and then come back so that we are able to catch up on lost time. Thank you for your kind attention, and we hope to hear from you soon after the next presentation is made. Thank you. So let's have the group photograph. Angela.